Try asking an AI model a hard question today and compare it to what you would have gotten 2 years ago. The answers are getting longer, but they are more cautious and absolutely riddled with disclaimers. Models are being designed to avoid risk at all costs, but the result is that they're starting to sound the same. And when every response has to pass through multiple safety filters, you inevitably end up with outputs that feel bland and repetitive. Early language models felt different. They were experimental, sometimes unpredictable, but genuinely interesting to talk to. There was a sense that you were talking with something that could genuinely surprise you. On the flip side, it wasn't always accurate and it definitely made mistakes. However, there was creativity in how it responded. The tension between what it could do and what it could get wrong made the whole experience way better. And then the guardrails started piling up. Legal concerns, PR disasters, platform policies. Companies realized that one bad output could turn into a huge headline, and headlines turn into lawsuits or regulations. So they started optimizing for safety above everything else. The goal became avoiding problems instead of maximizing usefulness. And you can see that in how these models respond now. You ask a sensitive question and you get a refusal template. Or you get an answer that's so bland and neutral that it doesn't actually tell you anything. The model will say the same thing 5 different ways just to make sure it's covered all its bases. That is risk management, not communication. And when you prioritize never saying the wrong thing over actually saying something useful, you end up with a system that's extremely boring to interact with. I'm not trying to say safety doesn't matter. It does, but there's a point where safety becomes pure sterilization. When every edge gets sanded down and when every answer has to be inoffensive and universally acceptable, creativity dies. Because creativity requires taking risks, and it also requires exploring ideas that might be unconventional or uncomfortable. And if a model is designed to never venture into uncomfortable territory, it'll never give you anything interesting. Now, here's where it gets more complicated. These models are trained on massive amounts of text from the internet. That's how they learn language, context, and how to generate responses. But as AI-generated text becomes more common online, future models are increasingly being trained on responses made by previous models. And if those outputs are already filtered, sanitized, and cautious, the next generation of models learns from that. Think of it like making a copy of a copy. Each new generation loses a little bit of quality. I've already covered this concept in this video, but here I'm going a little deeper. The original web data was chaotic and very diverse. They used language in creative and sometimes weird ways. But AI-generated text is more uniform. It follows predictable patterns and it avoids controversy at all costs. And if that becomes a significant portion of the training data, you start getting not only less quality models, but even more risk-averse than the models before them. This creates what's called distribution collapse. Instead of learning from a wide range of human expression, the models start learning from narrower and narrower outputs. The result is less stylistic diversity, less intellectual boldness, and more repetition. More repetition. Sound familiar? You start seeing the same sentence structure, the same rhetorical moves, the same boring, cautious tone across different prompts. It all just starts blending together. And users notice this. When you've interacted with large language models for long enough, you start seeing the patterns. You can predict how a model is going to respond before it even finishes the sentence. You just know it's going to hedge, that it's going to add a disclaimer, and that it'll never take a clear position. And once you can anticipate the structure of every response, the system just loses its authority. It stops feeling like a tool that can help you think and starts acting like a script that you know how it's going to end up every time. At a certain point, if AI becomes predictable enough, people won't ask it hard questions anymore. They'll stop using it as a thinking problem and start using it as a basic utility. For things like grammar checking, summarizing straightforward information, formatting, that's fine for some cases, but it's not what large language models were designed to do. They were supposed to be tools that could help people explore complex ideas, not just rephrase things in a safer tone. Personally, I've used AI to refine my arguments and test my ideas. It's useful when you're trying to figure out if your argument holds up or if there's an angle you haven't considered. Early on, these models could push back on you in ways that were genuinely helpful. They could present counterarguments, highlight weaknesses in your reasoning, and force you to think more carefully about what you were saying. But as models get more cautious, that dynamic changes. If an AI is designed to avoid controversy, it's not going to challenge you on uncomfortable ideas, which, over time, slowly but surely trains you to avoid conflict, which is another topic that I explained in one of my videos. Eventually, AI becomes less of a sparring partner and more of a bland assistant that's going to agree with you in the most inoffensive way possible. Or like when I've tried to argue against it, it might agree with you on some points, but it will always softly disagree with you on other points perpetually. Seriously, no matter how many times you try to angle it differently, it'll always be like, good, I agree with so-and-so, then some more filler, and then it goes, but here's where I have to softly push back against you. That's how it always works with ChatGPT. It can act weird like that, which is why there's a difference between a tool that strengthens your thinking anything, and a tool that just makes everything feel safe. And ChatGPT is definitely becoming the latter. Early AI felt like an intellectual gym where you could test your ideas under pressure. Now it's starting to feel more like an HR department that's always making sure nothing sharp gets said. One of those helps you grow, and the other makes everything feel comfortable and risk-free. Which is actually another topic that I covered in relation to AI addiction. If people start outsourcing their thinking to models that are built to avoid risk, that has long-term effects. If AI becomes the default tool for writing, analysis, and problem solving, but the AI itself avoids taking strong position or exploring difficult ideas, then the outputs people produce will start reflecting that. Human creativity will suffer because the tool we're leaning on is designed to play it safe. This isn't just about AI becoming irrelevant. It's about AI potentially dragging human discourse towards the same kind of mediocrity. If everyone uses a tool that avoids intellectual risk, and that tool is shaping how people communicate and think, then the entire culture of ideas starts to flatten out. Bold arguments get softened, controversial positions are hedged into nothingness, and what you're left with is a landscape where everything sounds reasonable, but nothing says anything. So why would companies build their AI systems this way if it risks making them less useful? Well, because they're not optimizing for creativity or intellectual depth. They're optimizing for liability, regulatory compliance, and advertiser comfort. Those are the incentives that matter when you're running a business at scale. If your AI says something controversial and it ends up in the news, that's a PR problem. If it generates content that violates platform policies, that's a moderation problem. And if it provides advice that could be interpreted as harmful, that's a legal problem. From the company's perspective, the safest move is to build systems that minimize all those risks, even if it means outputs will become bland. This follows the same pattern that we've seen with social media platforms. Yet another topic that's been on the news as of late. They start out open and chaotic, with a lot of freedom and a lot of risk. Then something goes wrong, there's public backlash, and the platforms start tightening their grip. Moderation increases, content gets filtered more aggressively, and the whole ecosystem becomes way more controlled. AI companies are going through the same exact cycle. They're moving from experimental and powerful to cautious and restricted. The problem is, when you restrict something too much, it stops being useful in the ways that made it interesting in the first place. If an AI has to avoid strong opinions, uncomfortable truths, speculative reasoning, and controversial interpretation, then what's left? What's left is a system that sounds intelligent, but rarely says anything sharp. It becomes a simulator of thought rather than a driver of thought. It can mimic the structure of a good answer without actually taking the intellectual risk that made an answer valuable. And this raises a bigger question. At what point does safety eliminate usefulness? Can AI remain powerful without being dangerous? Or will the safest version of AI always be the least interesting one? I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But I do think it's a trade-off AI companies are making right now, whether they're being explicit about it or not. If AI is going to shape how people think and communicate for the next few decades, it can't be afraid of thinking. It can't be designed to avoid every uncomfortable question or controversial idea. Because if it is, it's not really a tool for intelligence. It's just a tool for making everything sound polite and safe. And that's not the same thing. If you've noticed the same thing, and if you've felt models getting more repetitive and cautious over time, let me know in the comments and subscribe to my channel. I'm curious if other people are seeing the same shift. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.